So I get the pleasure of introducing our speakers this morning. We have Brad Coffing. He is a research analyst with Mybor Realtor Association. He joined the Mybor staff in May of 2018. He provides data, analysis, and research for the association, manages data requests, and collaborates with regional organizations on research projects. He has over a decade of experience in public policy and economic research, working previously at the Hamilton County Economic Development Corporation, the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, and the IU Public Policy Institute. Brad earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Indianapolis and a Master of Public Affairs from Indiana University in Indianapolis. Chris Pryor, Chief Advocacy Officer for Mybor. Chris has spent 28 years in the real estate industry, joining Mybor in 1994. Chris works as an advocate on housing industry issues and leads the association in engaging in community and economic development initiatives to enhance quality of life in communities across central Indiana. Chris has served in a variety of leadership roles, including the Greater Indianapolis Progress Committee, Board of Directors, Chair of the Central Indiana Regional Development Authority, and the Urban Land Institute Advisory Board. Chris has a bachelor's in public affairs from IU and is a graduate of the Oklahoma University Economic Development Institute. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. This is a really beautiful space, and I was telling Jean that this is a really neat program that you guys are doing in terms of the public policy, hitting topics and kind of generating community conversations. We have a lot to run through today, so I'm going to be brief in the intro, but we're just going to jump right in because we have a lot of slides to cover. I got to figure out the orientation here a little bit. So what we wanted to actually do today was just run through some data, kind of explore what the county looks like from a people, from a preferences, and then from a housing aspect of kind of what y'all look like, what the change has been, kind of what the challenges and the opportunities are. My boss, Chris Pryor, is then going to run through on kind of the advocacy side, some of the public policy issues that we're dealing with, and kind of the ideas that we're trying to bring to the table. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. One of the things I want to do real quick is, if you don't know who Mybor is the professional trade organization for nearly 10,000 realtors and affiliates. Those would be title, mortgage, inspectors throughout a 12-county area, which is mostly, which is mostly the Indy MSA plus a couple extra counties, right? We operate the BLC, which is the multiple listing service that we operate. It is a 16-county area. It actually encompasses a few extra counties to the south. So when we get into the housing data, we're just going to show you your county, right? We're just going to get into Hendricks County here. The other thing I wanted to point out is that you can go to mybor.com, and on the Market Insights tab, we produce a report every month. You can scroll through county by county. You can also see the broad Indy metro area, and you can look through the stats yourself. The other thing too is we have a public tool at the bottom that you can actually scroll down to, and you can kind of parse out some of the data at the county level, and you can look through a few of the trends if you're curious and checking out the housing data. So just wanted to run through that real quick. Population-wise, I wanted to show you county population totals. This is 2010 through 2020-21. If you look at the growth rate from 2010 to 2021, Hendricks County has seen really substantial growth. The one trend you're going to see in the next 3 slides is Hendricks and Johnson County are almost mirrors of each other. You guys are step for step in a lot of ways. You'll notice towards the very tail end in almost every slide where we show county populations, about 2020, 2021, you start to see a little deviation. Now, whether or not this is kind of the one-off or if this is the beginning of some kind of a trend, it's going to be really interesting to watch over the next 5 years. Over this time period, you had a 23% growth in your population. You can see Marion County at the top. Hamilton County is that blue. Johnson County is going to be your twin right there, that purple right below you. And Hancock County is going to be the red at the bottom. I wanted to show those 5 because those are kind of the movers. Those are the ones that you can kind of benchmark and compare against. A couple other ways to break this out. The 25 to 44-year-old age bracket, this is going to be your primary working age population. This is going to be the primary workforce, right? So how have things changed in that segment of the population? You can see, again, you in Johnson County, about 19% change from 2010 to 2021. Hamilton County had a 17% growth rate, and Marion County at the top had a 10.5. So the region itself and the counties within the region, as you would expect, are actually experiencing really strong growth. This is a really good thing from a housing perspective because this is driving more household formation, which is increasing housing supply, not at the rate that we need to be, as we'll show you in a little bit. The other thing we need to keep an eye on is aging demographics. One of the challenges that we have in the region and in each county respectively is that the share of population 65 years and over is growing at a very quick rate. You can see from 2010 to 2021, we had a 65.5% increase in the population of 65 years and over. This is something that we need to really have on the front of our minds when we're thinking about how communities grow and develop. How do we help people age in place? How do we help them find the appropriate product? How do we help them live in a way that's going to maximize their quality of life and connectivity to the communities that they've been a part of for such a long time? As you look out for population projections, as of right now, we're sitting out at about 179,000 people in Hendricks County. By 2050, the population is projected to be nearly 240,000 people, right? As we're thinking about housing, as we're thinking about our communities, how do we plan and have a strategy for growth that is going to be coming? You are a growing county. You have growing communities. You have a lot of really good things going for you all. How do we plan and develop a housing strategy to match this? Let's take a little bit of a look at the existing housing stock. This is from the U.S. Census Bureau. One of the things I wanted to point out is, oh, I do have a pointer. This is awesome. You are about 80% owner-occupied to 20% renter-occupied housing units. If you look at the average size of the household for owner-occupied, it's nearly three people. If you look at the average household size for the renter-occupied, it's just over 2 people. These are just things to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we're talking about development and strategies. One of the other things I want to point out, and keep this in your mind because this is going to come into play later, when you look at the housing product types that exist, when you think about the single-family detached home, it is about 80% of what exists in the county right now. You have about 5% of kind of the one unit, attached, which would be like a townhouse. And then you can see rental units are kind of spread out throughout product size. There's not a real dominance there, right? But that 80% to 5, keep that in the back of your head for later on. One of the other things to keep in mind is as prices for homes, prices in terms of rent have gone up, how cost burden are households in the county. If you look at homeowners, so this would be households with a mortgage, right? The rule of thumb is you should really spend no more than 30% of your income on housing, right? So anything at that or above is considered cost burdened. So if you look at about 5% is in that cost burden area, right? But about 12% almost is that extremely cost burden, where they're spending much more as a percentage of their income on housing. If you look at the rental side of it, it's a little bit more challenged. There just isn't quite as much product, and there's just more demand. You have about 12% that are in that cost burden. You have about a third that are in that extremely cost burdened, okay? So when we look at the incomes in the county, and this is kind of a back of the envelope way of doing this, but it gives you a really good insight to kind of where the incomes are and then what the purchasing power translates to in terms of buying a home. There's different rules out there. It depends who you talk to. Some people say you should look at about 4.5% of your income. Some people say 3.5%. We look at the Indy area, we look at the, the MSA, and it's really closer to 3. On average, people are spending about three times their annual income on a home, right? So if we use that as a proxy, right, and we just kind of extrapolate out for each of these income brackets over here on your left into what that would translate to in kind of price, in terms of price points, the median is going to be somewhere in the 75 to 99. It's about 82 if I remember right. Nope, 87. Boom, got it. The income bracket just above that is being served decently well by the marketplace, and we'll get into that. We'll show you a few of the slides from the MLS that we have. So you can see about 23% of households, 26% of families, and nearly 30% of married couples kind of fall into this. But one of the things I wanted to point out is there is a substantial population that fall just below this that are going to be severely challenged right now in the housing market when you look at kind of price, when you see price points, when you see what's being built too. I was looking just last night, and when you look at what was in the pipeline Q4 of 2022 in terms of new builds, it's being built much more for this price point here. There's very little in the county right now in the pipeline anywhere in this price point here. When we think about kind of the economics, when we think about jobs and where people live and where people work, things have changed a little bit since 2020. There's no doubt about this. This is the latest commuter stats that we have, and it's from the year 2020. Things have changed a little bit since then, but you're still largely a commuting county. You still send a significant amount of your workforce out of the county for jobs. You do have some in-migration, but there is a little bit of difference in terms of the jobs, and we'll get into this on the next slide. If you look at the people that live out of the county but work in, so this is kind of broken up by the income range. So you're looking at lower wages, kind of mid wages, and higher wages, and you can see what those translate to. This is per month. Those that live out but work in, you guys do a pretty decent job with kind of the mid-income range, right? So it's about 43% of the people that live out of the county but work in it are kind of in this mid-wage range, right? One of the challenges, and you can see the total numbers here in the bold, one of the challenges that you'll have is the people that live in the county but work out of it. So about 60% of those people that are in that higher wage category, right? So a lot of the higher wage income earners actually leave the county to go work somewhere else, right? Or their primary job is in some other county, right? This is just to give you kind of context for kind of the size of the economy here. This is county GDP, so this is actually the state GDP. These are in thousands, so add an extra 3 zeros on the end of it. So the GDP for Hendricks County in 2021 about $7 billion. That's about 2% of the state total. It's about 5.5% of the MSA total. One of the things that I pulled, and I took the 2021 because I wanted to be more current, is the percentage of people that worked from home. You had about 14% of the workforce said that they worked from home. You can see Hamilton County is about 27.5, Marion's about 13, and that's Madison, and then Marion's about 16.2%, right? So you have a decent percentage of the population that work from home now too. So now that we have kind of the people and the economics, one of the other things that we wanted to cover is kind of a shift in consumer preferences. This is a really neat project that we've done for 3 years now, or we've done 3 times. We did it in 2012, we did it in 2018, and we did it again in 2022, and it's something that we hope to keep on kind of a 4-year rolling basis. We partner with the Indianapolis MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and we work with a group called American Strategies. They're a polling firm in Washington, D.C. They do a really, really great job. And we send out we survey homes in the MIBOR 12 county area, so it's mostly the MSA plus a few extra counties. And we're asking people who live here, what are their preferences when they're thinking about where they want to live, right? And so in 2022, we collected 1,500 survey responses, which may not sound like a lot to you, but when you consider a presidential, they're about 300. So 1,500 throughout a 12 county area is a huge number of responses. It gets our baseline margin of error down to about 2.5%. So they're really solid numbers. So I wanted to walk through a few of the broad-based things we saw on the MSA level, and then get into the county level as well and kind of explore a few of those differences. So we asked people as kind of the warm-up question, tell us about your quality of life. How happy are you with your quality of life? And when you look at the MIBOR area, the 12 county area that we have, you see 86% of people said that they're pretty happy with their quality of life, right? When you look at Hendricks County, that number actually goes up. People here are pretty happy with their quality of life. About 90% said they're either very satisfied or somewhat. When we asked about the satisfaction with community features, so these are the amenities, right? These are things that people think about the most when they're deciding where they want to live. The things that stand out for the broader area, hospitals and doctors' offices, shouldn't have been a surprise, but this actually moved up from 2012. High-speed internet, again, should not be a shock. That moved up. Cultural resources, safety of the community, parks and playgrounds, high-quality schools, and on and on. Some of the things that kind of lagged, qualities of streets and roads, and affordability of housing really lagged this year. When we asked how important each of these things are, you see at the top of the list, safety of community, right? And then just below that, of course, high-speed internet has become much more important for everybody's lives. Quality of streets and roads and affordability remain really, really high. When you think about that gap with what people say is very important to them, and then they say how happy they are with it, a few of the things really stand out to us. Quality of streets and roads and affordability of homes. You can see the gaps here are pretty substantial, right? So these are going to be two challenges that we're going to face for a while now, right? Hendricks County, when we asked, how satisfied are you with each of these things? You can see the top of the list here. You feel like it's a pretty safe place to live. You like the ability to get to the doctor's offices. Parks and playgrounds and trails are nice. You have high-quality schools, reliable high-speed internet. Some of the things that lag in satisfaction, no surprise. Quality of streets and roads, affordability of housing. This is a trend that we see throughout the entire Indy metro area. How important are these things to you? Safety. Safety remains a very important thing. Right at the top, quality of streets and roads, availability of hospitals, reliable high-speed internet, affordability. When you look at these gaps, you have a 34% point gap and a 28-point gap. So then we asked people, tell us where you live right now. We gave them a choice and tried to describe different kind of neighborhood types. And then we came back again later on and asked them, now, where would you prefer to live? What type of a community type would you prefer to be in, right? One of the trends we saw throughout the Indy area was kind of this preference for a suburban neighborhood with a mix of houses and shops and stuff. So you can see the current is in the orange color, the preferred is in the blue. There is a 19-point gap between where people currently live, where they say it is a suburban housing only style, compared to a 12% saying that they prefer that, right? You see a pretty close to parity on this group here. I will make the argument that small town provides a lot of the same feel and aesthetics and amenities as this category here. Right. I grew up in a small town, proud to say it. I think about where I grew up and I think about where I live now, a lot of the same characteristics, same amenities, same feel, same aesthetics. The rural, this is one that really kind of baffles me a little bit. I think there's a lot of different arguments on it. I do think in the county there is probably a split, east and west, of kind of wanting to be more suburban mixed use. What did I just hit? There we go. Kind of a suburban mixed use, and then kind of want to be out in the countryside. Like there is that split, right? We then ask people, we say, okay, well, tell us what's more important to you when deciding where to live, the actual house and the attributes of the house itself, or the location that the house is in. So you can see in the broader Indy area, it leans a little bit more towards the location, right? Probably not a shock, location, location, location is always kind of the mantra, right? You see the similar thing here, though it's a little tighter in terms of the home itself. We ask people then, okay, would you be willing to stretch your budget to live in your preferred location, right? You see a decent amount say that they would, but overall, people tend to still be kind of budget conscious, right? People still want to stay, people have a budget, they want to try to stay within it. This is the one that surprised us a little bit more than anything else, was we said, all right, tell us your preferred housing product type. And we thought with the stay-at-home, the lockdown, the work from home, that we would have seen the opposite, that we would have saw the single-family detached product at least stay steady with where it was in 2018. But that didn't happen. We actually saw a pretty decent drop in that, and we actually saw a 9-point increase in the preference for a townhouse. The interesting thing about that is when we saw that, we thought, millennials, right? Yeah, millennials. No, it's across every age demographic. It's across the board, the same level of preference increase. And so I thought, well, that's probably just, the Indy Metro. You all had the same thing. It was amazing to see. So 70% said that they prefer this, but there's still a 16% demand out there not being met. If you think back to what we had up on that board on slide 3, we had 5% of the existing stock was this townhouse style kind of product, right? So about a third of demand being met there, right? We then actually described two different communities, community A and B, and asked people which they prefer. One of them was kind of the more walkable, where you had stores and shops and the restaurants, and you had kind of the housing types all mixed in. Then we had kind of your traditional single family, but you had to drive to stuff. In the larger metro area, you had a pretty decent split, right? You had a little bit higher preference for the walkable mixed use. When you look at your county, it flips back the other way a little bit. The interesting thing about that is 85% of what we build is in the blue category. There's a lot of unmet demand, both in the metro area and in your county, for kind of more mixed-use walkable product that is supporting a lot of the amenities and stuff that you look for in terms of quality of life. Then we came back and we said, okay, tell us, since the pandemic, this is the first time that we asked this, tell us which is more important to you or not as important to you anymore. So we came up with kind of this battery of questions. You can see, this was actually shocking to me, is that the stuff that had to do with the homes, for the most part, really people were kind of, it's okay, whatever, no real strong preference. Some of the things that really stood out, and this is county by county, being closer to family. So whether it's you have kids and you need grandma to come over and watch them because some kid got a bug and all of a sudden you got to work from home still again, or parents need somebody to help take care of them, or just being closer to each other after being apart for 2 years, right? You see those kinds of things really stand out. Being closer to grocery stores, the pharmacies, having more yard or green space. The home office has definitely become more important to a lot of people, and that goes back to the 14% of the workforce that says that they work from home. Getting into the market data. So this is from the MLS. This is from So this is just going to be your county actually. January was a rough month for closed sales. We started to see about September, October of last year, we started to see things really tighten up. Interest rates kicked up, and that's when you saw kind of the effect of that lag really coming into the marketplace. Economic uncertainty, unsure of where the rates were going to go or kind of where the economy was going to be. You started to see things really kind of freeze up a little bit. I like to always say, the market is where expectations come to meet. The expectations of when you list and the expectations of when you buy, and those things have to meet somewhere in the middle, right? For the last couple of months, we've been in a spot where those expectations haven't met really well. A lot of people were able to get into a much lower rate in 2020 and 21 and part of 22. So if you're sitting on a 2.5% or 3%, your incentive to move if you don't have to is a little less. But you also kind of know that. And so if you don't have to move and you want to list because you want to test the market, you don't really have to budge much if you don't want to. If you want to buy coming into the market, you kind of see things and you think they're down, so you think prices should then adjust, but as I will show you, they've not really adjusted, right? And so we're kind of stuck in this kind of standoff right now. You can see the orange mark right up here is when we started the wonderful pandemic that ruined everybody's lives. We typically had this nice seasonal pattern and we had the spring bump, but we didn't have that spring bump. Things got shifted back to the fall, and then things kind of took off like a rocket ship in 2021. So we're seeing a couple things now introduced into our marketplace. We're seeing the effect of the rates coming in about September, October. We are seeing seasonality finally return back to the marketplace after being absent for a long time. And so you're seeing both of those things really take effect. So this is preliminary data for January. This is probably going to change a little bit, so don't take this to heart. But closed sales definitely down compared to where they were last year. They're even down a little bit from the previous Januaries of previous years. Active inventory. Inventory, when I started in 2018, was the story then. The story then, though, was that we have no inventory, right? And then all of a sudden, you have this downward trend, and then you get this bump up about the middle of 2022, and you hit a high point in September, October, and people started to freak out a little bit because the inventories were going up, and now we're kind of getting back into this, we're seeing them drop back again, right? We're definitely up from all-time low when we had 76 homes on the market in the entire county. It actually dipped a little lower than that, sorry. It got down to 72 homes at one point in time. But it's not unreasonable to see 300 homes on the market at this time of year, and even then, that was a tight inventory. And just to give you some context for this, we look at things too in terms of months of supply. If you introduce no new product at the pace that you sell homes, how quickly would you sell out of everything on the market, right? When I started, we were sitting at about 3.5 months. And historically, 5 months is considered balance. We're still at 1.3 months of supply. We have a long ways to go in terms of the inventory getting back to anywhere near balanced. And then kind of getting back to where we were talking about price points. Price points really haven't budged much at all. The county for 2022, your median sale price at the end of the year was $330. That's about a 17% increase from 2021. For January, we're still sitting about $321. So that's, considering everything that's going on, that's still up 4.5% from last year. And then this has been the real Achilles heel of the marketplace, new listings. This is new product coming onto the marketplace, new inventory, right? And you can see that even by historical standards, we're low. We just haven't seen the inventory coming on. People are kind of sitting tight, seeing what's going on. Which is really having the effect of this, of prices staying high. Days on market, things are sitting a little longer than they had been, but still below kind of historical norms, right? So things are having to sit longer, but the right priced home will sell, as we do see, but they are having to sit a little longer for the buyers and the sellers to meet. And this is where I'm going to pass it off to Chris Pryor. Chris is going to talk about some of the advocacy work and the public policy issues and the opportunities and challenges we face from that aspect.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to switch gears just a little bit here. Brad's been talking a lot about the numbers. I'm not good with numbers, so we're not going to talk too much about numbers. But let's talk about some policies and some ideas and just give you some things to think about when it comes to how we're planning our communities and what's happening. So one of the things that we've spent a lot of time on the last several years is really thinking a lot about housing and economic development and how those things are tied together. What do we need to be thinking about for the future of our counties, our region? We know that here in central Indiana that we're projected to increase our new jobs here in the region by about 275,000 jobs over the next 20 years. We know that equates to the need for about 180,000 new housing units. So just to give you some perspective of what we need to be thinking about for the future if we're going to keep pace with the jobs that we're creating here in the region. We know that, well, one other thing that I'll mention in here, unless, Brad, you may have slipped it in later and I'm missing it, but we know we're about 2,000 units short per year to keep pace with that need throughout the region. So that's something that's compounding every single year, and it's something we've been experiencing now for over the last 10 years or more. We've been short of that housing need, and so that need is continuing to grow even though we're bringing in a new workforce. We also know that we can take a look at those projected jobs and we can think a lot about the needs for housing from some different perspectives too, just besides numbers. We know the types of people that are likely to come to the region based on the types of jobs that we're creating. So we know that a lot of the jobs we're creating are attracting younger folks, folks that tend to live alone and are looking for smaller households. In addition to that, we know that household formations are changing drastically, right? You guys have all seen this probably even within your own families. Back in the 50s, 75% of households were married. Today that number is about 50%. Back in those days, 43% of households were not only married but also had kids. Today that's about 25% of households. The thing that's interesting about that is that we continue to build most of our homes for the traditional family unit of that married couple, 2 kids, and the dog. Now we're missing the dog there, but you get my point that we're continuing to build the same product, but our households today have changed significantly, right? We have a lot of single-person households for various reasons. We have multi-generational households, and we have everything in between. We need to start thinking about supplying homes that can accommodate those different household formations to really accommodate the needs of our citizens going forward. So let's talk about a few myths that you'll hear that really have influenced what we're building today. Because we know that, as I mentioned, supply is a critical issue. We know that we're about 2,000 units short per year, as I mentioned. But it's more than just about creating supply. It's about creating the right type of supply going forward. So we know that there's 3 things that we really want you to think about here today. We need to build the types of products that people are looking for, whether that be a smaller home or a larger home for a multi-generational family. We need to start thinking about those things. What do people really need? We also need to be thinking more about price, right? What can people afford? What kinds of wages are we paying for the jobs we're attracting to the region, and are we actually supplying, are we building homes that those jobs can support? And finally, are we really building homes in the right locations, right? Are we forcing people to drive long commutes to their jobs because they can't find the right type of product or the right price of product within their community close to their job? So all things we'd like for folks to start thinking about. And there's a number of myths that will come up at any public hearing that you go to. So if any of you have been to a plan commission meeting or city council meeting, I guarantee you've heard one, if not all of these myths at one point or another. So let's talk about a few of them. So there's often times when folks will talk about how different types of housing products will impact values of homes. There's a lot of talk about how they'll impact schools, how they'll impact traffic and roadways, how they'll increase crime rates potentially. Our fire safety issues sometimes come to play on how we move equipment through more compact neighborhoods or units that are closer together. We talk about housing not fitting in, even being ugly, or that people just aren't interested in those types of homes. And so we shouldn't be building this type of home because nobody's ever gonna buy it, right? So we've all heard some of those comments. So let's talk about those. So one of the first ones is just talking about the impact on values. And this is an argument that comes up quite a bit. And it's something that's not surprising because when for people that purchase a home, it's often the largest investment of your life, right? So you wanna make sure that you're protecting that value. So it's not uncommon for people to be really concerned about what gets built around them because it could potentially have an impact on that value and people wanna protect that. So this isn't surprising that people bring this up, but you'll often hear things like these new apartments will drag down the value of my home, right? How many of you have ever heard that comment in a public hearing, right? Now replace that apartment component with any number of things, right? It could be smaller homes, it could be less expensive homes or a different type of homes. I'm sure you've all heard those same arguments many, many times before. So there's been tons of studies actually that have really looked at this, both appraisers and researchers. And in fact, all the findings show just the opposite in all these cases. We know that, and appraisers will tell you that different types of homes are not used in comps when they're looking at appraising for securing mortgages and financing and so forth. And so those other types of homes aren't bringing down values because they're built next year's. And they'll also verify that they've seen that different types of housing don't bring down values as well. Researchers have also showed that multiple types of housing built in communities, more times than not, actually increase the value of properties within a community. Having that mix of product is actually a good thing. So, but this is, again, something you'll hear time and time again. People take this as gospel when they show up and they say, but this will bring down my property value. Nobody ever questions it, right? But nobody's ever asked those folks for some facts on, show me where you got these numbers, right? So I just want you to think about that the next time you hear that argument thrown out there. We hear that denser neighborhoods will be a burden on schools. It could be apartments, it could be just a more dense neighborhood with smaller homes that we're talking about. We hear this from parents concerned about the impact on schools. We've heard it from school leaders. And this is something, again, that's not uncommon. We've actually done some studies to look at this. Smart Growth America actually did a study here in central Indiana looking at this very fact. We know that people that rent and lower income actually have fewer kids than traditional single-family developments with higher incomes. And we know that higher density actually increases or decreases the cost to municipalities in actually building those units. So there's multiple benefits providing services by municipalities to those denser multifamily units or denser single-family units is actually cheaper than those large, spread-out, single-family, large lot developments. So we've also heard things like dense housing will negatively affect traffic and parking. Roads can't handle the additional traffic. We hear this quite a bit. There have also been studies on this that actually large lot single family developments generate actually a larger volume of traffic, actually 2.5 times more trips per unit. And we also know that walkability and more dense development actually adds values. When you have developments like that, the actual property values go up. And we can also design our streets much differently. There's options on how we design. So if you think about this top design up here, with fewer entrances, if you lived somewhere near the entrance, think about all those cars that have to go in and out of that neighborhood. You have to see every single one of those go by, whereas you live in a more dense, more walkable type of design where you've got multiple entrances. You're going to have folks taking those different entrances and exits and creating actually fewer traffic by your property. So just some things to think about on ways we can do things differently. We also hear this quite often, that crime is an issue with denser types of development. Again, studies have shown that this is something that's been actually studied for several decades. We know that lower income, more dense developments by themselves do not increase the rates of crime. Studies have shown again and again and again that this is simply just not the case. And again, we can also design our neighborhoods and our developments with environmental factors in mind that will actually help increase safety with these more dense types of developments. So there are ways that we can actually address these things head on. Fire safety, as I mentioned, is another one. By putting things too close together, people are often worried about that, or they're worried about how we can move equipment through neighborhoods. This has been looked at by many folks over the years, and we know that actually more dense, compact development or multifamily units often have things built into the construction standards that actually help reduce fires. We know that people living close together are there to be more alert and can notify authorities much quicker than single-family developments. It's easier to get to a lot of these developments than it is through a long, confusing, winding, large neighborhood sometimes, getting back to those. And we also know that there's many communities that are working cooperatively with their public safety officials to design streets and things that can accommodate all of those needs. So I know everybody always hates to use the example of Carmel whenever I'm talking about these, but if any of you have driven through Carmel in recent years, and they've done a lot of really compact development, especially in their downtown, people might question, how do they move large fire trucks through there? But they've worked very closely with their fire department there to make sure that they can accommodate all of the needs of the fire department to be able to quickly and efficiently get to those residents throughout the area. We also heard that quite often when you talk about, especially when you're talking about density or affordability, people often conjure up images in their mind about the types of products we're talking about, and often we've seen, and this has been true in the past, there have been some really ugly examples of how we accomplish those things, right? And so that's what kind of sticks in everybody's mind. But we've come a long way today in how we do things, and there's opportunities for us to do things differently. These are just a few examples of creative design and how we can help blend these different types of products into traditional single-family only types of communities. So this first one, for example, is a duplex. Actually, it looks like a single-family home. You could put that in any neighborhood probably here in our community and nobody would ever know it's a duplex, right? You can do the same thing with turning this into a quad. This is a way of really blending those things in. Townhomes can often look much like single-family homes. And courtyard cottages can be a way to accommodate things like affordability, small lot development that can fit neatly even within a traditional family unit. And then a variety of different types of developments, like this last example where you mix things up, can really add variety and interest instead of having the same look repeatedly on products like a townhome. can really make an attractive product within a community that people are really interested in. So when we talk about things being ugly or unattractive, I think we can find ways around that. And then here's one last example, and I apologize, the picture on the left isn't very good, but again, we've come a long way. The example on the left is how we used to do things back in the day with trying to do workforce housing and affordable housing, where we built large apartment complexes, different things to accommodate large amounts of workers. Today, we can still accommodate a large number of folks in a small, compact, dense area in affordable ways. This example on the right's an example from Colorado, which is 50 units per acre of affordable housing. And I would say you could probably mix that in any neighborhood here and people wouldn't ever think about it being dense or affordable. So again, just an opportunity to think differently about how we can do things. If these things can be accomplished in places like Colorado, why can't they be accomplished here in Indiana, right? Well, we also hear a lot about there's no demand for these types of products. Residents want the traditional large lot single family home, and there is still a huge demand for that, as Brad showed earlier. But he also showed there's a huge demand out there that we're not supplying for this other type of development, right? So we know that 1 in 5, and people are changing to 1 in 5 Americans will be over 65 by 2030. We know that single family person households are continuing to grow. And as Brad mentioned, there's a lot of interest in those different types of attached, more walkable types of developments here in Central Indiana, and we're still not supplying those. We continue to build. The majority of what we're supplying in new construction is that large lot, single family only type of development. So just some things to think about as we're going forward. 3 out of 4 folks in Central Indiana live in a detached housing unit, but 1 in those 3 would prefer to be, again, in a walkable type of neighborhood. And as Brad mentioned, this is across generations. We know that both millennials, younger folks, and our older generation are also looking for these same types of products. So it's a real mix of how these things apply to residents in our community. So hopefully we've busted some of these, or at the very minimum, giving you some reason to think twice about just taking what people come in and talk about at these public hearings oftentimes as gospel, and maybe question some of the things that they raise, and maybe think about asking some additional questions. We need to make sure that, again, we're getting past some of these so that we can build the products that people are really demanding here in the region. So let's talk a little bit about fixable problems. How can we kind of maybe move some of these myths and also think about how we can fix some of these things? So I think that there's some things that we can all probably agree on, whether we're elected officials, builders, developers, neighborhood residents, business leaders. I think there's some common things we can all get around. And if we can all get around some common goals, there ought to be some ways that we can move forward on some of this. So I think we can all agree that we want to build and sell quality and demand homes. We want to develop safe, desirable communities. And we want to build environments where people want to invest, right? Can everybody agree that those are all good things, right? So if we can do that, why can't we find ways to work together? And I would say that something to think about as we move forward, the way that we've done things up until now has often been very combative, right? If you go to any public meeting, the things that happen between the building development community and our citizens, our elected officials, is often a very strained relationship and often very combative, right? For various reasons. We should find ways to get past that and find ways to work together. It should be a very collaborative process so that we all end up getting what we want that benefits the community at the end and gets back to those goals that we talked about earlier. So let's talk a little bit about zoning and kind of what's happened with that. So a quick history lesson, just if you will, just talking about zoning. So zoning was created back in the day to really protect us for things, right? So zoning was originally created to make sure that we were thinking about things in the environment and the way things were built, so that that home wasn't built next door to that steel mill. That was dangerous, but also something that wasn't wanted next door, right? So we created zoning to create buffers and plan our communities so that those things didn't butt up to one another. But today, we've changed that quite a bit. We've actually allowed a small vocal minority of folks to actually get involved in the process and have a louder voice in this. And today it's all about really protecting property values and addressing community character. So oftentimes we end up kind of designing homes by committee, and we end up with things that are oftentimes not the end product that people are really wanting. Now this looks like lots of our neighborhoods, right? And again, it kind of shows that committee has kind of repeated and come up with that same product over and over again. And we know that there are different types of products that people want out there. But the way that zoning works today, where we've let kind of that small vocal minority kind of rule the day, oftentimes with those myths that we talked about earlier, we end up with kind of the same product over and over again. And this really means two things. We end up with not supplying the product that people want, but we also do things that are physically damaging to our communities, right? Because it costs more sometimes to provide services or build the infrastructure or do the things that we're trying to do with some of these designs, because we won't address things like density and different types of products. So zoning should be more market responsive and physically sustainable. So look at this product right here, and does anybody think that this would be kind of a cool product to have in your community? Anybody? Can anybody imagine this getting approved in their community today here in Hendricks County? This is kind of what we're getting at. We need to think about how we get past some of the roadblocks in our current development process that prevent us from actually building the types of things we want. And so there's a few things that we wanted to throw out here today. This isn't kind of the end-all set of things that we can do, but hopefully it's a beginning of things that we can think about. Reducing single-family only zoning districts, eliminating minimums, matching infrastructure with development, making the entitlement process more iterative, deciding what we want to and sticking to it, and making things easier and faster and cheaper to build what you want. So, and I know we're running a little bit short on time, so I'll try to go through these a little bit more quickly, but let's talk about reducing single-family only zoning districts. Nearly 75% of all of our land in our communities is often zoned this way. This really limits right off the bat what we can do in our communities in trying to design different types of products, because it ends up forcing us to build that traditional large lot, single family housing only type of development again and again and again. So you've heard different communities across the country start to talk about this. Some of them have actually eliminated single family zoning. We're not saying go out there and eliminate all your single family only zoning, but think about reducing it. What if we just took part of our community and reduced some of that single family only zoning types of areas and put in something different? So just think about this real quickly. This isn't maybe a great picture, but the top is just kind of a rough drawing of kind of what we're stuck with today with single family only types of developments. But if we took away that single family only type of zoning, we could allow for neighborhoods with mixed types of designs that allow small apartments, duplexes, quads, townhomes to mix in with traditional single family only types of developments. And some people kind of shake their head at this, think, well, why would we do that, right? But we used to do this years ago. Drive through the older parts of many of our communities in the smaller parts of downtown where things are more dense, smaller lots, smaller square footage, but they're mixed in with duplexes, quads, townhomes, and you don't think twice about it, right? You get out to the suburb a little bit farther out, and all of a sudden, whoa, we could never think about doing that, right? Well, why not? We've done it for 100 years before, but we've allowed our zoning to change over the years that prevent any of that from happening today. So again, we're not saying let's change all of our zoning to make this happen every place we live, because we know a lot of people still want the large lot, single family only type of development, so you don't have to have it happen everywhere. But again, we've built already 90% of that is that product. Let's think about changing some portions of our community to allow for this different type of product. Eliminating minimums is another thing. We know that the minimums that are required for lot sizes, density, square footage sizes drive a lot of the cost of housing today, and also limit the types of products that we can design. So 25% of the cost of housing today is often tied to those types of minimum regulations. If we could reduce some of those and open things up and allow things to be more responsive to the market and what people want, we could look at some different type of products. We could look at things like ADUs or carriage houses that could offer different opportunities for folks as additional living units. We could look at narrow lots and infill, more dense types of products, small apartments and condos above commercial developments, and even for sale, townhomes or condos. So today we're often limited again from being able to do this simply because of minimums that we have on lot sizes, densities, and prices and so forth that don't allow for that type of mixed development. Another thing is infrastructure requirements. You've all driven through plenty of developments where we have tons of infrastructure going in place, large roads. These can add tremendous costs to developments. There's no reason that we can't think about making things more appropriate to the intensity and match the use within communities. Smaller roads work just fine in certain neighborhoods. You can move quite easily through there with cars and things that you need to do that don't require huge swaths of pavement. Those things not only are a burden to the developer and add to the cost of the new construction of that home that gets passed on to those buyers, but it also becomes a huge financial responsibility for the citizens and taxpayers to maintain that infrastructure down the road. So think about what we're requiring out there, and it goes beyond just roads. So, but roads are often an easy one. But you can also, there are also other benefits by thinking about doing things differently. Smaller roads actually slow traffic and increase safety in neighborhoods. So there are other things or environmental factors that can be improved by doing things on a much different scale. So we need to think about right-sizing our infrastructure. Making the entitlement process more iterative. We know that, again, getting back to that collaborative process is something that can really benefit all of our communities. If we know that there are things that the community wants to be built, there's no reason that we can't get our planners, our elected officials, and others to work more closely with the development community up front from the very beginning to achieve these types of products. Instead of making folks go to the drawing board and then go back again multiple times, which costs developers and builders a significant amount of money every time they have to do that, and often leads to a product somewhere in between what the market demand was actually calling for and what finally gets being produced, rather than producing some of the things that we could come up with, such as mixed use of housing and, again, products that could mix within our existing neighborhoods quite nicely today and offer a different type of product, different price. We can achieve affordability and different things. Here's one other thing that I would mention too. We need to figure out ways that our communities can come up with a vision of what they want to do and stick with it. Every time we hold an election, we replace our city councils, our planning commissions. We don't have any mayors here in the county, but in other communities, that's always a challenge too. We often get different visions by those elected officials that come in and influence the way our development goes going forward. We need to decide as a community what we want to build, and we need to get everybody on the same page. Once we've decided what those are, our planning commissions, our city councils, and others should help deliver on those things, right? They should not be delivering their own personal agendas on what they want to do. And I'm not saying that everybody does that, but it's something just to keep in mind that we need everybody to collectively understand what the vision is to try and get the end result that we want. So obviously updating our comp plans, our subdivision ordinances and our zoning codes, and achieving all the things that we want. So we can also make things much cheaper, faster for our development community to get things done too. Once we have decided what that vision is and we know what we want to do, let's regulate for it, but also reduce barriers and roadblocks and costs if we are able to do that. So this is just a quick example of an affordable housing development in Austin, Texas that was achieved because they were able to really help reduce the planning and permitting process and actually created some incentives to help drive to that type of development that they wanted in their community. So there are ways that we can think about improving that process for everybody. So again, I think getting back to those things we can all agree to will hopefully be kind of a stepping stone to getting us working together and moving in that right direction. Again, these aren't kind of all of the fixes out there, and we're not expecting everybody to think about adopting every single one of these, but why not try one or two of these out in your community and see what it can do? Take a small section of property that's zoned large or for single family only type of development right now, and let's think about changing up the zoning, reducing the minimum development standards on it. Let's see what can happen. We can take small steps to try and make some of these fixes. So the last thing I wanted to mention too, not the last thing necessarily, but a thing that I want to make sure we didn't forget to mention is that we need to think broadly about some of these issues too. We need to think beyond just our own community. We need to think about how we're addressing housing on a regional or even statewide basis. I know Mark Fisher with our Indiana Association of Realtors is here today, and there's a lot of stuff happening at the State House right now that's trying to address some of these same types of issues as well. But we need to get beyond our own borders, right? People live and work, as you go back to some of Brad's earlier slides about people where they commute to for jobs and where their homes are. This isn't just an isolated issue within a single county or single community. This is something we need to think about regionally. So we need to think about how our plans are coordinating with some of our neighboring counties. And then let me just leave you with a few things to think about that we've gone through here today, because I know we've thrown a lot at you. But inventory and supply continues to be our biggest challenge. We need to continue to think about how we can deliver more housing product to provide homes for the workforce that we're attracting here. We put forth a ton of effort and resources into attracting new folks for jobs here in Central Indiana. We need to make sure we can house them. But let me make sure that everybody remembers that it's more than just about providing that supply, right? We need to make sure that we're building the homes that people want, right? What do they desire? What do they desire in housing? Are we delivering products at the right price point? We're creating jobs and wages at certain levels, and are we matching the housing to accommodate that type of workforce and that wage level? And are we putting them in the right locations? Are we forcing people to drive one or two counties over to a job because they can't find housing close to their job in the community they'd like to live to? Or do they want to change, or do their housing needs change throughout their life? And are they able to find all of those housing needs within the same community? whether you're looking for your starter home, your growing family, or you're ready to downsize. Can I find those all in my community, or do I need to look elsewhere to find those? We need to ensure that, again, the economic development strategies and housing strategies are tied together, and vice versa. We spend a lot of resources and effort developing our economic development strategies here for the region without ever giving a second thought to housing. We need to start making sure that housing is a critical component of that economic development strategy going forward. We also know that we need to ensure that we're thinking about things like density, something that's a topic that nobody ever wants to talk about when we're talking about developing our communities. Everybody's afraid of that more compact, dense, walkable type of conversation. But there's a huge demand for it out there, and we're not supplying the product that people are looking for. And we need to get past some of the fears about some of this. And it's the only way we're going to tackle things like affordability. They're also critical to think about as we start thinking about the future use of our land. We need to be smarter about how we're using the remaining amount of developable land that we have left. And we also need to think about how that impacts all of you as taxpayers, because if we're continuing to use large swaths of land for large spread out, single family only types of developments, those things cost more. That's just the facts, right? Providing services and infrastructure to all those things just simply cost more. Again, we're not saying don't build any of it, because there's still a huge demand for it, but we also need to think about doing things differently, right? And then lastly, it's critical that communities continue to invest in quality of place. As Brad mentioned in some of our community preference surveys, we know that quality of life is often more important than the qualities of the home itself when people are looking on where to live. So in addition to thinking about the housing, we need to also think about the amenities and quality of life factors that pair with that housing in our communities. So with that, I'm going to close it out. And again, our contact information is up here. We're more than happy to provide additional information, have conversations with any of you, come out and do additional presentations. We can slice and dice a lot of the data that's in here at a much refined level. So if you're interested in anything, looking at anything in a different light, we're also able to do that. So
Thank you. Thank you to Brad and Chris.
thank you for the opportunity.